how's it going? Welcome to the video. Hope you're having a great day. Today I'm doing the third and final part to this mini-series that I've had going on, and I'll be drawing a Western Bluebird that will have a geometric pattern background. And as before, the intent behind this piece is to celebrate the colors of a female bird in a species where the male colorization is the more well-known. In this case, male bluebirds have very bright blue on the head, the wings, and the tail, and a rusty brown-orange on the breast. Females, however, are much more gray, mostly on the head and parts of the wings, and their breasts are a lighter or duller orange, although they do have that bright blue on the tips of their tails, the tips of their wings, and sometimes a little bit in their head. And like I mentioned earlier, this is specifically a Western Bluebird. I had to choose between the Western, the Eastern, and the Mountain Bluebird. And while mountain bluebirds are very beautiful, they don't have that orange chest, and I wanted the additional pop of color in this drawing. Then that left the Eastern or the Western Bluebird, and honestly, they look very similar. I kind of had a hard time telling them apart, and I chose the Western just because I live on the West Coast, and it just felt a little more appropriate. And overall, I wanted to do the Bluebird because of the color blue. The first drawing I did in this series was a goldfinch, so it was yellow, and then the next one I did was cardinal, so they were red. And I liked the idea of there being 3 of these, where I had all the primary colors represented. So, of course, the Bluebird seemed the obvious choice. And with this drawing, I didn't really have any major struggles, like I did with the last ones. I definitely learned a lot from the previous 2 pieces, and I felt like this was a good, culmination of what I learned. Particularly how I wanted the lines to look, how I wanted to lay out the colors, and the technique for how to do that geometric pattern in the background. If I really wanted to pick out a struggle that I had, it would probably be with the colors later on when I was laying out the colors. I had to decide which reference photo to use, but I'll get to that a little bit more later. But yeah, I think I got pretty lucky with the reference photo on this one. I kind of talked about this in the last, I think both the last 2 videos that I did, kind of some struggles with finding good reference photos. And the Bluebird is another one, like the Cardinal, where the females really do vary quite a bit in their colors. The males stay pretty consistent with the brightness of the blues and where they're placed, but since females are duller in color, they really come in quite a few shades of gray or blue. Some females have a lot more blue, like on their heads, like I mentioned earlier. Some of them don't. Some of them are kind of more of a dark gray, some of them are a light gray, and it leaves me with kind of a lot of choices to make in terms of how I want it to look, because there's really no one way for the female bird to look, so there's no one way to represent it. My goal was really to try and represent all the colors that they can be. That also includes the grays and the browns, so I really wanted to make sure those colors were well represented, as well as the blues and oranges. It's really just a matter of what grays and browns do I choose to show, and which colors kind of look best. So in the first piece I did with the goldfinch, I went into the geometric pattern without much thought for how I wanted it to look in the end. And it turned out looking kind of like a sun, which I thought was very fitting for the colors that I did. For the next piece with the cardinal, I went in knowing that I wanted it to look like a snowflake, so I had a lot more direction in how I wanted it to look. For this one, I was somewhere in between. I had kind of two thoughts for how I wanted this pattern to look, either like a flower or like feathers coming out from the center. And I kind of went in without much more thought, but clearly I was leaning towards the feather look because that's what I ended up doing. But in a way, it does still kind of look like a flower, just made from feathers, and I am very much okay with that. So I kind of wanted to talk again about about the process for how I did the lines for this geometric pattern. And I know I touched on this in the last few videos, and specifically in the last video, I mentioned that I decided to use the pixel brush to draw the lines because it's much easier to use the fill tool with it. You don't get any kind of like feathering or pixels right around the edges of the lines that don't get filled. And that sentiment is still true. I did still use the pixel brush to draw the lines as I am doing here. But something I noticed with my last drawing was that I didn't really care for how kind of chunky it made the lines look in the end. Since I'm using that pixel tool, there's no like smoothing. It's just kind of jagged looking, and I didn't really care for that. Now with the first piece I did, I used the paintbrush tool to draw the lines from the beginning. And although I wasn't using the fill tool quite right with that setting, and I got a lot of those, unfilled pixels around the edges, once I cleaned it up, I thought that it looked much better because the lines were very smooth. And I will say I have played with the fill tool off camera between the last piece and this piece, and I do recognize that you can adjust the threshold levels with that tool. And what that means is if you set the threshold value to a high number, it means that the tool will look to a wider variety of colors to fill in when you select the color to fill in. And so that helps take care of those pixels at the very edge because they're close to the, in this case, like white. They're close to the white color. So with a high threshold value, the tool will see those as colors that also need to be filled in. And this works best when the color you select to fill is a very different color than the outline. In this case, white versus black. However, the problem that I had with doing this was my process for filling this pattern in involves me going back and forth quite a bit and putting in the color down and see if it looks good, and if it doesn't look good, then I put a different color down. And the problem comes when you fill the space with a color that's very close to the outline, and if you want to go back and put a different color in there, maybe a color that's lighter, you have to remember to turn the threshold value down on the fill bucket tool, or else it'll think that the outline is part of the colors that need to be filled in. And it's just a pain. You can definitely do it the other way by adjusting the threshold levels and starting out with lines that were made with the paintbrush tool. It's definitely doable, but for me personally, I just found it easier to not. Because when you do the lines with the pixel brush tool, it creates very clean edges that are easy to fill in, and you don't have to worry about adjusting the threshold level of the fill tool. So where does that leave me? I prefer to use the pixel brush to draw the lines, but I like the smoothness of the paintbrush to finish off the lines. So what I ended up doing was initially I drew the lines in the pixel brush, and that is the layer that I will use to fill the colors in. But to get the smooth lines, I created a new layer on top, and I went over all the lines with the, in this case I used the pen, I didn't use the paintbrush, just because the pen tool doesn't vary its line width with different pressures, so as opposed to using the paintbrush tool, you run the risk of getting different line lengths or line widths if you apply more pressure. But yeah, so I basically just went over the lines again on a new layer, and that kind of covered up the jaggedness of the pixel lines underneath it, and it ended up working out pretty well. I guess it's a little bit of a trade-off. Either I draw the lines initially with a smoother brush, and I just have a little bit more work to do filling in the lines to make sure I don't accidentally fill in the lines themselves, or I just do this little extra work now to draw the smooth lines over the top and don't worry about adjusting the levels of the fill tool when it's time to fill in the colors. And that's just the way that worked out for me. So like I mentioned earlier, this is the part where I kind of struggled the most with just laying down the colors. As you can see, I had two photo references that I was using, and I thought that I liked the one with the darker, more bolder colors better, and initially I was planning on just using those colors to fill it in. I picked out the colors of the brighter reference anyway, just in case, which I'm glad I did, because as I was laying down these colors, I just decided that they just didn't look quite right for what I wanted. Couldn't tell you why. I like having the purple in there conceptually, but in practice it just didn't really look good for how I was laying out the colors. Initially I drew the head a little bit more brown, which is the color I pulled off from that darker reference photo, but you know, I think it was just a little bit too dark, and I kind of liked the brighter gray from the second photo better, or the lighter photo better. But ultimately I think I ended up using colors from both, but for the grays I definitely pulled more from the lighter image, but I think I used the darker blues from the darker image, the more vibrant dark blues. The lighter grays and browns just kind of looked better to me. I guess they had better contrast to the bright blue and the darker browns that show up in the wing. Really pop better with the lighter tones in the rest of the body. Yes, by the way, I did miss a spot while filling in these colors. I'm sorry if you noticed that. I won't put it out in case it will bother you, but I didn't notice that missed spot myself until I thought I was completely done and I was done recording. Don't worry, I do go back and fix that spot. I just do it off camera, so you'll see it fixed in the final showing of the piece. So there it is, and I will show it with the previous two pieces that I did because all three of these were kind of meant to be together. All the colors were kind of done with the intent that they would be looked at together, and I'm quite happy with how they turned out. but after having done 3 pieces, I am just a little bit burnt out at this style for now, and I'm kind of itching to do something else. So even though I learned quite a bit from doing these pieces, I'm very happy with them. I love how they look together. I'm ready for something new, so next time I will be doing something different. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.